Glacial formations. When glaciers erode the landscape, they don't just leave behind these huge valleys, they also tear up the landscape, creating a lot of gravel and rubble. They move that gravel and rubble around, they deposit it elsewhere, right, creating these glacial deposits that we can interpret. So we're going to go through some of these. The first is glacial tilt. I think of glaciers kind of like giant bulldozers, and as they are bulldozing the landscape, creating those U-shaped valleys, they crush up the rocks, turn them into sediment, and push that sediment out in front of them like a bulldozer. And that sediment is what we call till. Right? It's unsorted glacial sediment that is derived from the erosion and entrainment by the moving glacier. So often you'll see just a pile of glacial sediment, and we know that we call that till. Now, sometimes, rather than lots of little sediments being caught up in the glacier will pick up one huge rock and carry that huge rock for long distances. And then after the glacier melts, it's going to drop that huge rock. And we call that huge rock that has been dropped far away from its source a glacial erratic. Okay? It's a large rock that ended up not where it was formed and not surrounded by anything else that looks like it. We also call it a drop stone, right? Because the glacier dropped the stone. If you remember back to Kayla's, when she gave her guest presentation in class, she had a picture of her sitting on top of the glacial erratic, on top of a drop stone. All right, another feature that is created is a terminal moraine. So we talked about how glaciers create glacial till when they bulldoze through the surface, and they leave that glacial till on their boundaries, on their edges. And they also leave glacial till where they stop, right? The furthest they flow. So here you can see that terminal moraine here. And the terminal moraine is deposited and signifies the maximum extent of the glacier. Right? This is the farthest point that that glacier flowed, and then it stopped flowing and maybe started eroding away or started melting away. But that terminal moraine preserves evidence of that farthest glacial flow. And these can be huge and actually form landscapes that we're familiar with today. So Long Island, Cape Cod, Martha's Vineyards, a lot of that area is formed by terminal moraines. Glaciers came down from the north. They reached this location, deposited those terminal moraines, melted and retreated backwards, and therefore a lot of these islands only exist because they're terminal moraines. All right. Also, as those glaciers are bulldozing the landscape, they're leaving behind erosional scratches on the surface of the earth, and we call these glacial striations. And these glacial striations can be small, right, on the order of millimeters to centimeters, or they can be huge on the order of kilometers. So the Great Lakes, the Finger Lakes, and Puget Sound are all huge examples of glacial striations. This image is of the Finger Lakes in New York, and I want you to think about what direction did the glaciers flow? Well, the Finger Lakes themselves are striations, so we can tell that the glacier flowed in the direction of the lakes. Same thing for Puget Sound. It was formed by glaciers. And so we know that when glaciers existed there tens of thousands of years ago, glaciers flowed from north to south along the same direction as the Puget Sound. Okay. So looking at glacial striations all around the world, we can determine the direction of ice sheet movement during the Pleistocene, which lasted from 2.6 million years ago to about 12,000 years ago. And during this time, all of Canada and quite a bit of the northern US was covered in a giant ice sheet that flowed away from the center in Canada in the Hudson Bay, outwards in all directions, including down towards the US.